Let's do it. I'm
All
ready.
right. Uh, so over the weekend, there was a shooting in Orlando that left 50 people and 53 wounded, sorry, and 50 dead. And everyone seems to have an opinion on this, on what happened and what could have prevented this. And of course, in my opinion, most of them are wrong, or at least incomplete. Now, let me give you some examples. Now, the right is essentially saying Islam. It's Islam. It's nothing but Islam. Islam is the problem. It's violent. He's a terrorist. End of story. Okay, well, the left is essentially saying, let's ignore the Islam angle, and let's talk about how it's the guns, right? It's the guns. It's the guns only. The guns are the problem. Now, of course, I have with me Jordan French, who's a gun owner and a progressive as well as a devout Christian. And basically, Jordan, what I want to discuss with you is what both sides are getting wrong in this discussion. Now, as I said, I want to give you some examples before we get into this discussion. And I want to start out with Donald Trump. Now, he says on Twitter, appreciate the congrats for being right on radical Islamic terrorism. I don't want congrats. I want toughness and vigilance. We must be smart. Now, he also said, is President Obama finally going to mention the words radical Islamic terrorism? If he doesn't, he should immediately resign in disgrace. Now, we've got another influential figure on the right, who is Kurt Schilling. Now, he says, scary part. I just read the story, but I bet I can nail some facts. 1. Follower of Islam from birth or converted. 2. Has some history of terrorist acts and or talk. 3. Was in possession of firearms illegally obtained. And 4. Liberals will turn this into another need more gun laws discussion. Now, you also have regular people from both sides weighing in with their opinions. You have, as I said, all on Twitter. As a gay man, I understand Islam is not my friend. I will never tolerate something that wants me dead. Grab your guns, gays, and hashtag pray for Orlando. Joe Walsh says Obama will not tell the truth about Islam. We must. Muslims hate gays. Hashtag Orlando. Now you have some from the left side who are basically calling for gun control. Hashtag gun control now. GOP won't change for children. No chance they'll change for LGBTQ. Only option, take back Congress. Another one, it was a shooting that killed 50 people. Tell me again how guns don't kill people. And finally, there's the call to ban Muslims. There's the call to ban Mexicans. Can we finally sound the call to ban assault rifles? Now, Jordan, you hear some of these reactions, and there's a ton more. What do you think about this, and do you think they're getting anything wrong? Is there something missing?
Well, of course they're getting something wrong, and it's easy to be the person that comes in and tells people how wrong they are. That's kind of human nature. Just on the front end, let me go ahead and apologize to your listeners. I'm getting over some serious congestion right now. You can hear it in my voice. This is definitely not my best radio image. Um, And actually, Jeff, I'm getting a ton of feedback on my end. Let me, if I can kick the mic back over to you. Oh, okay, it just went away. So I guess we're good. All right. Yeah. So these reactions, you get them, and like, I don't know, my initial response is that I want to, I don't know, kind of, give people some rope to work with. Like this is a horrible, horrible thing. So of course it's going to bring out the most visceral reactions from everybody on each side. Like that's something that you kind of have to, not completely accept and forgive, but you have to make some allowances for. Um, this is whenever you see 100 people get gunned down and half of them die and half of them, are horribly injured or whatever. Like that's a tough thing to process, and human beings are going to do what human beings do when that happens. Um, I guess, but then so yeah, there's the other thing is that I want to give people the benefit of the doubt, but you can't help but get the feeling, at least for some of them. I'm not talking about the necessarily the average Joe out there who's driving, who's carrying on these narratives, but at least for the people driving the narratives, that they're coming from different places. So I have some really, really serious issues with the way liberals cover gun violence because liberals don't know guns, and they make really bad suggestions that aren't going to help and are going to kind of perpetuate the problem. but at the same time, like they're coming from a good place. Whereas I feel like a lot of people on the other side are, not necessarily coming from a good place. And again, not the people at the bottom, but the people who are really kind of, driving the conversation are coming from a place of, maintaining the status quo, which may or may not be benefiting them, financially at any given time. But yeah, so that's just kind of my initial reaction to all of it. What about you, Jeff?
Well, I definitely think they're missing things because whenever we have a mass shooting, usually you always have the two sides, right? And there's always a political discussion, which I think is important to have because guess what? This is part of politics. Having discussions in order to solve problems. And it's undeniable that we have a gun problem in America. We have a problem with killings, and we have a problem with mass killings. We also have a problem in Chicago with gang-on-gang violence. That's a thing. That exists. Now, conservatives love to bring that up as an example of how gun control laws don't work. But of course, there's always they always forget the idea or the fact that Chicago is an island in a sea of guns. There are guns everywhere, and it's really easy to traffic them back and forth. So, I mean, there's a lot.
Yeah, and a lot of those same people are people who would oppose Washington or Seattle and Colorado's marijuana laws because they were convinced that it was going to lead to the proliferation of marijuana in border states. Those are the same people telling you that gun control doesn't work because Chicago's gun control doesn't stop people from buying guns in Indiana. Now, to be fair, there's a lot of libertarians that are not saying that. They're against, they're totally for marijuana and guns. Mm-hmm. But we're painting with a broad brush here as we are, want to do. But
right. But in this discussion, we tend to get a lot wrong. Both sides have their particular talking points they like to stick to. Now, I tend to favor a more comprehensive approach, right? I think that we should have common sense gun reform. That makes sense. But we shouldn't stop there. We should also talk about mental health. Now, I know Republicans, a lot of conservatives, when it's not, a Muslim, which is in this case, which is, clearly seems to be an act of terrorism. But then again, aren't all mass shootings, don't they all qualify as terrorism?
Yeah, this is an example of, or not, this isn't necessarily an example because the guy was a Muslim, but it's an example of how we've so, like, whether we even realize it or not, I don't think it's even intentional a lot of times, but we basically bought into the idea that terrorist is a Muslim who does bad things.
Right.
Right? Like, anybody who commits a mass shooting, like, that's a terrorist, period. Mm-hmm. And it used to be that way, like whenever Timothy McVeigh blew up a building, he was certainly not a Muslim, and we called him a terrorist. Like, it wasn't. We used to not have this discussion until the Bush administration and the Obama administration continued it. This idea, of it was just kind of the latest way to dehumanize the people that we were going to bomb, by calling the bad players in those places terrorists. And so, like, this whole bizarre conversation we have where somebody goes and shoots up a nightclub and shoots 100 people, and we have to wait till the facts come out to determine whether or not he's a terrorist. That's the one thing we don't need to wait on. I know we're going to get into talk some more about what Kurt Schilling said here in a few minutes about and just how stupid it is to jump the gun. But the one thing right out of the bat, when 100 people get shot, a terrorist did it. You don't have to know if he's a Muslim. You don't have to know if he's a Christian. You don't have to know what his reasoning was. You don't have to know if he's part of a network. He's a terrorist. Like, that can safely be assumed out of the get-go because that's the definition of terrorism. And it's really frustrating to me that we're willing to associate such a strong word as terrorism to such specific acts from very specific people. And then we have these kind of, I've had this conversation, I'm sorry if I'm getting off topic here, but we're otherwise very intelligent people turn around and say, well, I'm not, it's kind of that reduction to, not all Muslims are terrorists, but most terrorists are Muslims. No, it's that we just don't call the acts of terrorism that we used to call terrorism anymore. Mm-hmm. We only call it terrorism if Muslims do it. And then that's a huge, huge problem. I know we're kind of getting away from the gun control stuff you brought me to speak to,
Well, actually,
but it's
this
definitely a problem
talks
we have.
this kind of talks to the broadness of what we actually need to try to use to solve this problem overall, because it's not just a problem that's solved with gun control, and it's not just a problem solved by doing something about fundamentalist religion. This is a problem that needs to be solved with a broad approach. And I was talking about mental health earlier, right? And the problem is that a lot of conservatives love to bring out the mental health angle, specifically to try to say that they're not terrorists, right? If it's a white person, a lone wolf, he had mental issues. He's not a terrorist. Only Muslims can be terrorists. Well, that's sort of tied into. Now, this guy also had mental issues. But see, here's the conversation. We also need to talk about mental health, but not just do something. And we also need to do something about guns. And that's part of that big comprehensive approach, and that's what we miss in this discussion. We don't talk about mental health because the right talks about mental health, and then a lot of liberals will take a look at that and go, no, it's not mental health at all. Let's talk about guns. Guns are an important factor. They're even a major factor, but so is mental health. And so is, you've got mental health, you've got guns, you've also got Islamic fundamentalism, which is a problem, as is fundamentalism of all types.
And we would be remiss to not interject that another person planned a very similar mass shooting on the same day and just happened to get caught, who was not a Muslim. So it's the guy that was planning to shoot up the gay pride parade out west, the same day. Thank God he got caught and we didn't have two of these in the same day. But it's not mental health, gun is it's not certainly radical religion is part of it. But yeah, this is kind of your point, that like without a comprehensive approach to this, we're not going to do anything.
Yeah, and to get a comprehensive approach, we have to have a comprehensive conversation. We need to talk about all these things that are involved, and not just focus on he's a Muslim or we need gun control. Yeah, let's have a broad conversation. Now, you mentioned Kurt Schilling, right? And I want you to address the problem you had with Kurt Schilling's tweet, because I see a lot of them. So go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, okay, so the first problem, the easy problem, I guess, is that, like he's like, right out the bat, I can nail down some facts. All right, first off, bro.
Facts.
I normally don't get into the whole, like, don't politicize this tragedy discussion, because it's usually a cop-out that people use whenever there's a serious event that speaks against their side, and quite frankly, like, human beings tend to react better, whenever faced with anecdotal evidence of something. So, like, if you want to affect change for the greater good, then sometimes that means, taking using a horrible thing to advance something to stop future horrible things from happening. But one of the ways that you definitely shouldn't politicize the tragedy is to come right out of the bat with your political talking points before the facts are on the ground. Right, like, which is exactly what he did. Like, it's one thing to, if you're the NRA or somebody on that side, to argue for more people to arm themselves to protect themselves after a shooting, and it's one thing if you're on the other side to say we need some gun control to stop more shootings, but it's a completely different thing to just come out of there with nobody, with no facts on the ground, and just to use the deaths of these 50 people and the injuries of 50 plus more to come out and just be able to spew these talking points that are here to just kind of gin up animosity towards people who disagree with you, whether that be on the issue or religion or whatever it is. So that's the first and obvious problem. And then kind of tie into that is the second problem that's pretty simple, is he got one of his facts wrong. The guy didn't obtain his weapon illegally, which is especially damning, I think inadvertently so, to Kurt Schilling's point that, his second fact was this guy has a history of violence or whatever. And his third so-called fact was that the guy got his weapons illegally. Well, he was right on fact two. The guy had a history of violence, And yet it was perfectly legal for him to buy that weapon in America because if you don't commit a felony, we let you buy a gun. And it doesn't matter how much violence you've had in your past. If you didn't reach felony level, we let you buy a gun. And because of those lax laws, even if you can't buy a gun legally, it's pretty easy to go buy one from a non-licensed FFL because there's so many of them, floating around out there. Um, but that's kind of another issue. But so there's that. And then finally, and this is kind of the one that you kind of read into. This is where it goes past surface level.
Mm-hmm.
Is the thing that makes me so upset about what guys like Kurt Schilling say, and many others who we know beyond a shadow of a doubt this gentleman used Islam as a shroud to wrap himself in to commit this act. He called 911 and pledged allegiance to ISIS the day of the shooting, and all that stuff. But so here's the thing. So like you say, oh no, see this is, and people use this on the right like to take a swipe at Obama, or whoever their political enemies are, that we're not being tough enough on ISIS. That's the problem because this guy he claimed he was with ISIS. This is ISIS in America. This isn't about gun ownership. This isn't about whatever. This is about ISIS in America. The problem is, man, whenever you do that, like, okay, so I don't mean to step on anyone's toes here. I don't mean to be hard-hearted or unkind, but this guy fits the profile of almost every other mass shooter in that he's a loser who's a male, who his relationship with the girl, was broken down. He didn't have a lot of friends. He couldn't find happiness, from the significant other because nobody wanted him apparently, and so he went and shot up some folks. And so like a lot of people, they'll I've seen because I do run in the gun community. I have a lot of guns and I really enjoy shooting and stuff. So I run with a lot of those people, and I see things. They say things. I see things get posted. Like whenever there's a shooting in France or in Brussels, about see they've got gun laws and it didn't stop it. Well, first off, I know I'm talking. This is a really long track to get here, but I'm going to tie it back into to Kurt Schilling's comments. First off, they have a lot less gun violence in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
And second off, those attacks took weeks and weeks and weeks to plan. They cost tons of money. There were advanced networks that had to smuggle in weapons and pay for training and do all this kind of stuff. And maybe not so much in the France case, but at least in the Brussels case, we know that law enforcement, because of all that stuff they had to do, law enforcement had a lot of chance to stop these guys and should have, and just because of the bureaucracy of their law enforcement and just kind of failures on their end, they didn't. But it very much could have been stopped. Mm-hmm. The thing is, and so they had actual ties to ISIS. Right, they actually received orders, and the operatives were connected to people in ISIS. ISIS had to. My understanding is that it was actually funded on the local level, but still there was this element of organization and planning and all these steps that could have gotten in the way, and it just so happens they didn't. Whereas here in America, none of that has to happen.
Yeah,
right? This guy called 911 the day of the shooting, pledged allegiance to ISIS, and went out and had an attack that was every bit, if not more, catastrophic than what happened in Brussels and Paris. It was one guy who literally, this isn't necessarily how it happened, but it could have, if he wanted to, that day could have walked into a Walmart, bought a gun, then gone over to a gun store and bought a 100-round magazine, bought thousands of rounds of ammunition, and gone and done a shooting spree that very day, and had the same effect. And all that to say, what's going on here is a lot of these guys that they do, some of them are in it for their 15 minutes of fame or whatever. They're losers who are mad at the world and they want to go out in a blaze of glory, and so they take down all these people with them. Some of them may have just committed suicide. We've got such a problem with gun suicide in this country. A lot of the gun death statistics, the lion's share of gun death statistics are not homicides or suicides. A lot of these guys would have maybe committed suicide, which is a tragedy by itself, instead of seeking help. But what we do whenever we boil this down to this common denominator and say it's not about all these big problems that we have as a nation that other developed nations don't have, it's just ISIS, it's just Muslims.
Hmm.
What we do is not only do we give them their 15 minutes of fame, but we give them a chance to, at least in their minds, truly feel like they are a part of something bigger than themselves, right? Like that's why guys join the military, because they want to serve, they want to be a part of something bigger. There's this aspect of contributing to something more than just yourself. And whatever talking heads come out and say that this lone wolf guy who just so happened to find a religious flag to wrap himself around is ISIS in America, and that's the problem, then like all they're doing is they're justifying it. They're providing that outlet for him. Like he's not only getting his 15 minutes of fame, he thinks he's doing something for the greater good because in his twisted mind, like he's got this cause, he's got ironically, since he's a Muslim, he's got this crusade. I guess some interpretation of a jihad, whatever it is. He's got this thing that he can wrap himself in, because instead of taking a hard look inside and addressing these actual problems, guys like Kurt Schilling or whatever talking heads that are, or whatever people need ratings and know they can gin up some fear ratings by talking about ISIS,
Or Trump.
immediately start talking about how ISIS is infiltrating America, despite the fact that there's nothing to suggest that operationally ISIS had anything to do with this. All we're doing is giving crazy people an outlet to, maybe they had those hurdles, right? Maybe they can't quite, they don't want to just commit suicide. Maybe they're not quite to the point where 15 minutes of fame is enough to that their anger has driven them to do something horrible. But man, you can give even, decent people a cause and they'll do some bad things. So when you have people who are, on the edge or violent or whatever the
Or
case may
angry.
be, whenever you give them a cause, to just because it happens to fit your talking points, you really open the door for a lot of horrific things to happen. And I feel like that's kind of what we're doing right now.
Hmm. And, by the way, while we do that, we ignore all the other issues that we've talked about that would actually do something to solve the problem. It's all about just casting blame and not trying to solve the underlying problem, which unfortunately there's a lot of pundits that aren't worried about that. They're not worried about solving the problem, and this happens a lot more on the right. We're not interested in solving problems. We're just interested in ginning up anger, hatred, because you know what? It's good for the bottom line and it's good for our ratings, and that's really what's super sad. Jordan, I want to thank you for joining us here, for going around the nation with me. Definitely love to get your input and everything on this stuff from your perspective. So thank you again for joining me.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.